A judge labels a black mother as irresponsible right in the courtroom. But then she opens her bag, and his whole attitude changes. What was she hiding all along? Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. Judge Maxwell Hartford had spent 27 years on the bench of the Westbrook County Family Court, and in those years, he'd developed what he considered a finely tuned instinct for sorting the worthy from the unworthy. He prided himself on his ability to see through sob stories and excuses, to cut through the emotional appeals and get to what he called the hard truth of responsibility. His colleagues called him the Hammer for his unyielding stance on personal accountability. The defendants who passed through his courtroom had less flattering names for him. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, Judge Hartford entered courtroom 3B with his usual brisk efficiency. His black robe billowed slightly as he climbed the 3 short steps to his bench, nodding curtly to the bailiff who announced his arrival. The day's docket was full, as always, but Hartford moved through cases with mechanical precision. He had little patience for attorneys who weren't prepared or defendants who weren't punctual. By mid-afternoon, fatigue had begun to set in. Hartford's back ached from sitting in the same position for hours, and he'd already gone through 2 cups of the courthouse's notoriously bitter coffee. Case number 47B was announced. The State versus Tamara Jackson, regarding custodial rights and child support enforcement. Hartford barely glanced up as the parties took their places. The state's attorney, a young woman named Melissa Chen, stood ready with her tablet and neatly organized files. The defendant's table remained empty for several uncomfortable moments until the courtroom doors burst open. "I apologize for my tardiness, Your Honor," called a breathless female voice. Hartford looked up, his steel-gray eyes narrowing at the disruption. A young black woman hurried down the aisle, a large, worn shoulder bag clutched to her chest, and a backpack slung haphazardly over one shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore what appeared to be nursing scrubs beneath an unzipped jacket. She was clearly flustered, her breathing ragged as if she'd been running. "Ms. Jackson, I presume?" Hartford's voice was cold. "Court was scheduled to begin at 2:30. It is now 2:43. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm so sorry. The bus was late, and then I had to—" "Spare us the excuses, Ms. Jackson," Hartford interrupted, making a notation in the file before him. "Your chronic tardiness is noted in your file from previous appearances. It seems punctuality is a challenge for you." Tamara Jackson fell silent, her eyes downcast as she took her place at the defendant's table. Hartford noticed she didn't have an attorney present. "Ms. Jackson, where is your legal representation?" I couldn't afford to keep my lawyer, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself today." Hartford sighed audibly. Self-represented litigants always slowed down proceedings. "Very well. Ms. Chen, please present the state's case." Melissa Chen stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of child support enforcement. Ms. Jackson has failed to make the court-ordered payments for the past 4 months, totaling $2,400. The children's father, Mr. Darius Williams, has primary custody of their 2 children, ages 8 and 10, and relies on these payments for their care. We're asking the court to enforce the payment schedule and consider appropriate penalties for non-compliance." Hartford turned his attention to Tamara. "Ms. Jackson, do you dispute that you have failed to make these payments?" Tamara's voice was soft but steady. "No, Your Honor, I don't dispute that." "Then please explain why you believe you should not face consequences for neglecting your legal obligation to support your children." Hartford's tone carried the weight of judgment already formed. Tamara took a deep breath. "Your Honor, 6 months ago, I lost my job at Mercy Hospital when they downsized the nursing staff. I immediately started looking for new work, but it took me nearly 3 months to find my current position at Westside Urgent Care. I'm now working full-time, but I'm still catching up on back rent and utilities that fell behind while I was unemployed." She reached into her bag, fumbling for something. "I have documentation of my job loss, my job search efforts, and my current employment. I also have a payment plan that would allow me to catch up on the missed child support within 3 months while maintaining current payments." Hartford's patience was wearing thin. In his experience, these were just more excuses. "Ms. Jackson, why didn't you file for a temporary modification of support when you lost your job? Why wait until you're thousands of dollars in arrears and the state has to drag you into court?" Tamara looked up, a flash of frustration crossing her face. "I did file, Your Honor, 3 separate times, but my paperwork was returned each time for different technical reasons. I have copies of all my filings and the rejection notices." She continued digging through her large bag, papers spilling onto the table before her. Hartford watched with growing irritation as she sorted through what appeared to be a disorganized mess of documents. "Ms. Jackson, this disorganization is exactly the problem. How can you expect to properly care for your children or meet your obligations when you can't even manage your own affairs?" Hartford's voice had taken on the lecturing tone he reserved for those he deemed irresponsible. "Your children deserve better than this level of chaos and neglect." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Melissa Chen, the state's attorney, looked uncomfortable at the harshness of the judge's words. Tamara's hands stilled over her papers. When she looked up, her eyes were shining with unshed tears, but her voice remained composed. "Your Honor, I have never neglected my children. Not once. The financial support of one's children is a fundamental responsibility, Ms. Jackson. By failing to provide that support, you are, by definition, neglecting a critical aspect of parenting. Actions speak louder than words." Tamara took another deep breath, then reached deeper into her bag. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Hartford waved his hand dismissively. "That won't be necessary. Your documentation can be presented to the clerk." "It's not documentation, Your Honor. It's something I think you should see." Something in her tone made Hartford pause. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Very well. Approach." Tamara walked forward, her large bag still clutched to her chest. As she reached the bench, she carefully opened it wider and tilted it slightly so that only Hartford could see its contents. The judge leaned forward, expecting to see more disorganized paperwork. Instead, his eyes fell upon a tiny sleeping infant, no more than a few weeks old, nestled securely in a makeshift carrier inside the bag. The baby was perfectly clean, dressed in a yellow onesie, a small oxygen monitor discreetly clipped to its foot. A thin tube connected to a portable oxygen supply was taped carefully to the baby's tiny nostrils. Judge Hartford froze, his prepared admonishment dying on his lips. "This is Maya, Your Honor," Tamara whispered, her voice barely audible to the rest of the courtroom. "She was born 7 weeks premature while I was between jobs and without insurance. She spent the first month of her life in the NICU. She was discharged last week but still needs oxygen support and constant monitoring. The medical bills..." Her voice caught. "I couldn't afford a babysitter for today's hearing. And the hospital social worker said she couldn't be in daycare yet because of her immune system and oxygen needs." Hartford stared at the sleeping infant, so small and vulnerable, yet being cared for with obvious devotion despite Tamara's circumstances. In that moment, all his certainty about this case, about this woman he had so quickly judged, crumbled. For the first time in many years, Judge Maxwell Hartford found himself completely speechless. The courtroom remained silent, the tension palpable as Judge Hartford stared at the tiny infant. Maya's chest rose and fell in delicate movements, the soft hiss of the portable oxygen concentrator now audible in the quiet room. Hartford looked from the baby to Tamara's face, seeing the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the worry lines etched around her mouth, and the quiet dignity with which she stood before him despite his harsh words. "Your Honor?" Melissa Chen's voice broke the silence, her confusion evident as she tried to understand what was happening at the bench. Hartford cleared his throat. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. Ms. Jackson, please join me in my chambers. Ms. Chen, you as well." He banged his gavel once, the sound unusually subdued, before rising from the bench. As Hartford led the way to his chambers, he found himself uncharacteristically unsettled. The baby, Maya, had disrupted the neat categories into which he typically sorted the people who came before him. His chambers, normally a sanctuary of order and control, suddenly felt foreign to him as he held the door open for Tamara, who entered carefully, still cradling her bag with its precious cargo. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. The formality that usually defined his interactions had cracked, revealing something more human underneath. Tamara sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, adjusting her bag so that Maya remained comfortable and the oxygen tube stayed in place. Melissa Chen took the seat beside her, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes kept darting to the bag. "Ms. Jackson," Hartford began, then paused, unaccustomed to the uncertainty he felt. "Perhaps you should start from the beginning." Tamara nodded, her hands never stopping their gentle, unconscious rocking of the bag. "I was a registered nurse at Mercy for 6 years. I loved my job. After the divorce, when Darius got primary custody of the boys, my support payments were calculated based on my salary there. I never missed a payment, not once." Her voice held no defensiveness, just a simple statement of fact. Then came the hospital merger and the layoffs. I was one of 23 nurses let go. I filed for unemployment and started looking for a new position immediately, but healthcare jobs dried up after the merger. 3 facilities closed in our area last year. Hartford nodded. He'd read about the healthcare consolidation in the local papers, though he hadn't considered its ripple effects on families like Tamara's. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after losing my job. It wasn't planned. My boyfriend," she hesitated, "he didn't want anything to do with a baby. He left." The simple statement carried the weight of abandonment, but Tamara continued without self-pity. "I kept applying for nursing positions. I had interviews, but nothing came through. As my pregnancy progressed, it became harder to find work. Then, at 29 weeks, my water broke." Tamara looked down at Maya, her voice softening. She was so tiny, just under 3 pounds. The doctors weren't sure if she would make it. I spent every moment I could at the NICU, talking to her, touching her when they'd let me. I still sent out job applications from the hospital waiting room. Hartford watched as she gently adjusted the oxygen tube on Maya's face. The care in her movements was unmistakable. Westside Urgent Care finally hired me 3 weeks ago. It pays less than Mercy did, but they're willing to work with my schedule given Maya's needs. I started my payment plan to catch up on what I owe for the boys as soon as I got my first paycheck. She reached into a side pocket of her bag and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper. "Here's proof of the payments I've already sent, and my plan for the remainder." Hartford took the paper, noting that she had indeed made 2 substantial payments in the past 3 weeks, prioritizing her child support even as she must have been drowning in medical bills for Maya. "And the father of your sons, Mr. Williams, is he aware of your situation?" A shadow crossed Tamara's face. "I've tried to explain, but communication between us is difficult. The divorce was contentious. He prefers to go through the system rather than talk directly." Melissa Chen cleared her throat. "Your Honor, if I may, the state's interest is in ensuring the children receive the support they're entitled to. However, given these extraordinary circumstances, there may be room for a more flexible approach." Hartford raised an eyebrow. It wasn't often that the state's attorney suggested leniency. "Mr. Williams was quite insistent that we pursue this case aggressively," Chen continued, but he may not have been aware of all the factors involved. Hartford turned back to Tamara. The oxygen equipment for Maya, is that covered by insurance? Partially, Tamara replied. I have medical coverage through my new job, but it doesn't start until next month. The hospital social worker helped me get emergency Medicaid for Maya, but there are still out-of-pocket costs and equipment that isn't fully covered. And you brought her to court today because I couldn't find anyone qualified to watch her. She needs someone trained to monitor her oxygen levels and respond if there's a problem. The home health nurse only comes 3 times a week for an hour each time. I called the court clerk last week to explain and ask if we could reschedule, but she trailed off. Hartford felt a twinge of discomfort. He knew exactly what had happened. His clerk would have followed his strict instructions. No postponements for personal matters, no exceptions. He had established those rules himself, convinced they prevented people from gaming the system. Your Honor, Tamara continued, I love my sons. I've never missed a visit, even when I was 9 months pregnant. I call them every night. I help with their homework over video chat. I'm not trying to avoid my responsibilities to them. I just need a little time to get back on my feet. Hartford studied the woman before him. The easy judgment he had passed in the courtroom now felt shamefully inadequate. This wasn't a case of irresponsibility or neglect. This was a mother doing everything humanly possible to fulfill her obligations to all her children under nearly impossible circumstances. A small sound came from the bag. Not quite a cry, more a mewling whimper. Tamara immediately responded, her movements practiced and gentle as she lifted Maya out, cradling the tiny infant against her chest. The baby couldn't have weighed more than 5 pounds even now, her limbs impossibly thin, her skin still bearing the translucent quality of the premature. She needs her feeding, Tamara explained, reaching into her backpack for a small bottle. The doctors want her to gain at least an ounce a day. Hartford watched as Tamara expertly adjusted Maya's position, ensuring the oxygen tube remained in place while she offered the bottle. The infant's tiny hands, no bigger than Hartford's thumbnail, flexed against the bottle. There was something both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring in the scene. The fragility of the baby, the fierce competence of the mother determined to keep her child alive and thriving. In his 27 years on the bench, Hartford had developed what he believed was an infallible system for separating the deserving from the undeserving. He had been certain that his judgments were based on an objective assessment of character, unmarred by prejudice or assumption. Yet in this moment, faced with the reality of Tamara Jackson's life, not as a case number or a stereotype, but as a human being navigating impossible choices with grace and determination, he found himself questioning everything. Had he been this wrong before? How many other Tamaras had stood before him, their complex realities flattened by his rush to judgment? The thought was profoundly unsettling. Maya finished her bottle, and Tamara gently raised her to her shoulder, patting the tiny back with practiced care. The baby made a soft sound, barely audible, and Tamara's face transformed with a smile of such genuine love that Hartford had to look away, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. Ms. Jackson, he said finally, I believe we need to reconsider this case in light of this new information. He turned to the state's attorney. Ms. Chen, would you be amenable to a continuance while we review Ms. Jackson's payment plan and perhaps consider a temporary modification of the support order? Chen nodded, her own expression softened by what she had witnessed. The state would have no objection, Your Honor. Hartford looked back at Tamara, who was gently returning Maya to her makeshift carrier. Ms. Jackson, I believe I owe you an apology for my assumptions and my words in the courtroom. They were unwarranted. Tamara looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot. As they prepared to return to the courtroom, Hartford found himself wondering about Darius Williams, the father who had been so insistent on pursuing this case. What was his story? What had he been told about Tamara's circumstances? There were still pieces of this puzzle missing, and Hartford realized with some surprise that he genuinely wanted to understand the full picture. For the first time in many years, Judge Maxwell Hartford felt the stirring of something he had long suppressed in his courtroom: compassion. When Judge Hartford re-entered the courtroom, his demeanor had visibly changed. Gone was the rigid posture and stern expression that had earned him the nickname, the Hammer. In their place was something more measured, his movements deliberate as if carrying a weight previously unacknowledged. The gallery, filled with people waiting for their own cases to be called, noticed the shift immediately. They straightened in their seats, exchanging curious glances as Tamara followed the judge back into the courtroom, her precious bag still cradled protectively against her chest. "Court is back in session," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly attentive room. Hartford settled himself at the bench, arranging his papers with unusual care before looking up. "In the matter of the state versus Tamara Jackson, we will be granting a continuance to allow for review of new information and consideration of a modified payment plan. The case will be rescheduled for 3 weeks from today." He paused, then added, "Ms. Jackson, the court will accommodate any special needs regarding your infant daughter at that time." A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Hartford rarely granted continuances, and never with such consideration in his tone. The spectators who had witnessed his earlier harsh words to Tamara now looked between her and the judge with undisguised curiosity. "Ms. Chen, please inform Mr. Williams of this development and advise him that the court would like him to be present at the next hearing." Hartford's voice carried a note of authority that hadn't been present before, as if his compassion had somehow deepened rather than weakened his judicial presence. "Yes, Your Honor," Chen replied, making a note in her file. "Additionally," Hartford continued, "I'm ordering a stay on any penalties or enforcement actions regarding Ms. Jackson's child support arrears until our next hearing. Ms. Jackson, please ensure that you continue making payments according to the plan you've presented." "I will, Your Honor. Thank you." Tamara's voice was steady, dignity evident in her upright posture despite the exhaustion that clearly pulled at her. As Hartford prepared to move on to the next case, the courtroom doors opened, and a man strode in with the confident air of someone accustomed to commanding attention. He was tall and well-dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of financial comfort, his presence immediately drawing all eyes. "Your Honor," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the room, "I apologize for interrupting, but I believe that's my case you're discussing." Hartford's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Darius Williams, Your Honor, the children's father." Hartford studied the man. So this was Darius Williams, successful real estate developer, primary custodian of 2 boys, and the insistent force behind the state's aggressive pursuit of Tamara Jackson for back child support. In person, he exuded the self-assurance of someone unused to having his demands questioned. "Mr. Williams, while I appreciate your interest in these proceedings, this hearing has concluded for today. We've scheduled a continuance for 3 weeks from now, at which time your presence would indeed be welcome." Williams didn't move toward the exit. Instead, he approached the front of the courtroom, stopping just short of the barrier. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I took time away from my business to be here today. I was informed that this would be resolved today, that the court would enforce the support order as written." There was an edge to his voice that Hartford didn't miss, the subtle insistence of a man accustomed to having systems work in his favor. Hartford had heard that tone before, had even respected it as the voice of proper authority and order. Today, it struck him differently. "Mr. Williams, court procedures are not dictated by personal convenience, no matter how busy one's schedule might be." Hartford's voice was level but firm. "New information has come to light that warrants careful consideration. As I said, We will address this fully at our next hearing." Williams's gaze shifted to Tamara, who had remained silent, one hand still resting protectively on her bag. "What new information? She's known about her obligations for years. This is just another delay tactic." Hartford felt a flare of irritation that surprised him with its intensity. 2 hours ago, he might have agreed with Williams's assessment. Now the man's dismissive assumption struck him as both uncharitable and uninformed. "Mr. Williams, Ms. Jackson has presented documentation regarding significant life changes that impact her ability to fulfill the current support order. The court is obligated to consider such factors." "Life changes?" Williams scoffed. "Your Honor, while she's been coming up with excuses, I've been raising our sons, alone, paying for their clothes, their food, their activities. They need stability, not promises." Tamara shifted in her seat, and Hartford saw the conflict on her face, the desire to defend herself warring with the awareness that any outburst would only reinforce negative perceptions. "Mr. Williams," Hartford said, his tone cooling further, "are you aware that Ms. Jackson recently lost her nursing position due to downsizing at Mercy Hospital, or that she has since secured new employment but at a lower salary?" Williams waved a dismissive hand. "Everyone has job challenges, Your Honor. That doesn't relieve her of her responsibilities." Hartford felt something hardening in his chest, not the familiar righteous certainty that had defined his judicial career, but a new form of resolve. "Are you also aware, Mr. Williams, that Ms. Jackson gave birth to a premature infant 7 weeks ago? A child who requires specialized medical care and constant monitoring?" This information finally seemed to register. Williams blinked, his assured expression faltering. "I was not aware of that, no." "Perhaps then you might consider that there are circumstances here that warrant a more nuanced approach than immediate enforcement." Hartford's voice remained professional, but those who knew him well might have detected a new note in it, something that sounded remarkably like advocacy. "Your Honor," Williams began again, regaining his composure, "whatever Ms. Jackson's personal situation, my sons shouldn't have to suffer for it. They depend on that support." At that, Tamara finally spoke. "I have never intended for my sons to suffer, Darius. Never." Her voice was quiet but unwavering. "I call them every night. I help with homework. I haven't missed a visit even when I was in the hospital myself. I love them more than anything." "Then pay what you owe," Williams retorted. "It's that simple." Hartford watched the exchange with growing understanding. There was history here, tensions that extended far beyond the financial agreement on paper. He thought of his own divorce decades ago, the bitterness that had colored every interaction until time and exhaustion had finally worn it down to a dull, manageable ache. "Mr. Williams," Hartford interjected, "nothing about family law is that simple, as I'm sure you're well aware. The court's primary concern is the welfare of all children involved, including both your sons and Ms. Jackson's infant daughter." Williams looked startled at being contradicted by a judge who had a reputation for siding with his perspective. He adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture at odds with his confident demeanor. "Of course, Your Honor. I'm just concerned about consistency for my boys." Hartford nodded, acknowledging the point while not conceding to it. A valid concern. However, the court must balance multiple factors in these cases. He paused, then made a decision. "Mr. Williams, since you're here, perhaps we could use this opportunity productively. Would you be willing to join Ms. Jackson, Ms. Chen, and myself in chambers for a brief discussion? It might help us prepare more effectively for our next hearing." Williams hesitated, clearly thrown by this unexpected development. In the gallery, the waiting litigants exchanged glances. Judge Hartford inviting parties to chamber discussions mid-session was unprecedented. "I suppose that would be acceptable, Your Honor," Williams finally agreed. Hartford turned to the bailiff. "Please inform the remaining parties that we'll have a 30-minute recess." To Tamara and Williams he added, "My chambers, please." As the four of them made their way to the judge's private office, Hartford felt an unusual sense of purpose. For 27 years he had seen his role as applying the law impartially, unclouded by emotional considerations. He had prided himself on treating every case as an intellectual exercise in legal principles. But watching Tamara Jackson cradle her fragile newborn while fighting to maintain her connection to her sons, seeing the complex interplay of pride and vulnerability in both parents, Hartford was beginning to understand that true justice might require something more nuanced than rigid application of rules. It might require seeing the full humanity of those who stood before him, with all their flaws, struggles, and dignity. For the first time in his long career, Judge Maxwell Hartford was considering the possibility that compassion might not be the enemy of justice, but its necessary companion. The atmosphere in Judge Hartford's chambers was charged with unspoken tension. Tamara sat in the same chair she had occupied earlier, her bag cradled protectively in her lap. Darius Williams took the seat furthest from her, his posture rigid and defensive. Melissa Chen positioned herself in the middle, her legal pad ready, while Hartford settled behind his desk, studying the two parents with newfound interest. "Mr. Williams," Hartford began, "I believe there are aspects of Ms. Jackson's current situation that you may not be fully aware of, and which significantly impact this case." Williams's jaw tightened. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm aware that Tamara has always had excuses for not meeting her obligations. That's been consistent since our divorce." Tamara's eyes flashed. "That's not fair, Darius. I never missed a payment until I lost my job." "Ms. Jackson," Hartford interjected gently, "perhaps you could help Mr. Williams understand your current circumstances more clearly." He nodded encouragingly toward her bag. Tamara hesitated, then carefully adjusted her position to reveal the sleeping infant nestled inside. "This is Maya," she said softly. "She was born 7 weeks ago, at 29 weeks gestation. She weighed less than 3 pounds. Darius stared at the tiny baby, momentarily speechless. The portable oxygen concentrator hummed softly, its significance unmistakable. "Maya still needs oxygen support and constant monitoring," Tamara continued. "She was only discharged from the NICU last week. That's why I brought her to court today. I have no one qualified to watch her, and she can't be in daycare because of her immune system." Darius's expression shifted, genuine surprise replacing his defensive posture. No one told me you had a baby." "Who would have told you?" Tamara asked quietly. "We haven't had a real conversation in over 2 years. Everything goes through lawyers or court mediators." Hartford watched this exchange with interest. There was history here, pain certainly, but perhaps not the simple narrative of a deadbeat mother and responsible father that he had initially assumed. "The timing of Maya's birth and NICU stay coincides exactly with Ms. Jackson's missed support payments," Hartford explained. "She has documentation of her job loss, her subsequent employment search, and her new position at Westside Urgent Care. She has also already begun making payments again, according to a plan she developed herself." Williams ran a hand over his face, visibly processing this information. "The boys have been asking why they haven't seen you in person lately," he said to Tamara, his tone softer than before. "I told them you were busy. I was on hospital bed rest for 3 weeks before Maya was born," Tamara explained, "and then at the NICU every day after that. But I never missed our video calls, not once. I tried to explain to them that I was in the hospital, but—" She trailed off, looking at Darius. "But I told them not to bother you with questions," he finished, having the grace to look somewhat ashamed. "I didn't know you were dealing with all this." "Because you didn't ask," Tamara said simply. There was no accusation in her voice, just a statement of fact. Hartford cleared his throat. Mr. Williams, may I inquire about your financial situation? The court records show you're a successful real estate developer. Williams straightened, professional pride momentarily overriding the emotional complexity of the moment. Yes, my firm has done well, particularly in the commercial sector. The past 2 years have been our most profitable to date. Then may I ask why the enforcement of Ms. Jackson's support payments during this clearly temporary setback was pursued so aggressively? The amount in question, while certainly not insignificant, doesn't seem likely to create hardship given your financial status. The question hung in the air. Williams shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's the principle, he said finally. The court ordered those payments. They're for the boys' benefit. Is that the only reason? Hartford pressed, sensing something beneath the surface. Darius looked away, his confident facade cracking slightly. My mother thinks I'm too lenient with Tamara, he admitted. She says I let her get away with too much, that I'm not standing up for myself or the boys. She's the one who insisted I push the attorney to file for enforcement. Tamara closed her eyes briefly, understanding crossing her features. Your mother has never approved of anything I've done, Darius. Not when we were married, and certainly not since. Hartford raised an eyebrow. Family dynamics were often at the heart of these cases, though rarely so explicitly acknowledged. Mr. Williams, while I appreciate family loyalty, the court is concerned with what's best for the children, all the children, not with satisfying parental or grandparental expectations. Maya stirred in her makeshift carrier, making a small sound of distress. Without hesitation, Tamara lifted her out, checking the oxygen tube and gently soothing the infant. Hartford noticed that despite the tension in the room, her movements with the baby were completely calm and assured. Darius watched this interaction, something shifting in his expression. She's so small, he said quietly. She's gained almost a pound since birth, Tamara replied, a touch of maternal pride in her voice. The doctors are pleased with her progress. Mr. Williams, Hartford said, redirecting the conversation, were you aware that Ms. Jackson attempted to file for a temporary modification of the support order immediately after losing her job? Williams frowned. No. I was just told by my attorney that she had stopped paying and wasn't responding to notices. That's not true, Tamara protested. I filed paperwork 3 times. It kept getting returned for various technical reasons. I have all the copies. Chen, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. Your Honor, I've reviewed those filings. They were indeed submitted but rejected due to procedural issues. It appears Ms. Jackson was attempting to navigate the system without legal representation. Hartford made a note, mentally adding another item to his growing list of systemic failures that had contributed to this situation. The family court system, with its complex forms and procedural requirements, was nearly impossible to navigate without an attorney, a luxury many couldn't afford. The boys ask about you all the time, Darius said suddenly, his voice lower. Jason got MVP in his basketball league last month. He kept looking for you in the stands. Tamara's composure faltered for the first time. I watched the game on Mrs. Henderson's Facebook live stream. I saw him get the trophy. I was so proud. Her voice caught. I sent him a video message right after. He didn't tell me that, Darius said. Would he have felt safe telling you? Tamara asked, the question hanging between them like a weight. Hartford watched a realization dawn on Williams's face, the understanding that perhaps, in his desire to be the better parent, he had inadvertently discouraged his sons from expressing their connection to their mother. Mr. Williams, Hartford said gently, in my experience, children benefit most when both parents support their relationship with the other, regardless of adult conflicts or financial arrangements. Williams nodded slowly, absorbing this. "The boys do love their mother," he admitted. "They get excited every time she calls." "And I love them more than anything," Tamara said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "That's never changed, not for a single moment." Hartford looked between them, seeing not just a legal case but two people who had once loved each other enough to create a family together, now struggling to navigate the broken pieces of that dream while still caring for the children caught in the middle. "I believe," he said carefully, "that we have an opportunity here to move beyond the adversarial approach that has characterized your interactions up to this point. Ms. Jackson clearly wants to fulfill her financial obligations to her sons, and Mr. Williams, I sense that you want more for your boys than simply receiving a check each month." Both parents were watching him now, their attention fully engaged. "I'm proposing a different approach," Hartford continued. "Instead of focusing narrowly on the missed payments, let's develop a comprehensive plan that acknowledges Ms. Jackson's current realities while ensuring the boys' needs are met. Not just financially, but emotionally as well." "What exactly are you suggesting, Your Honor?" Williams asked. "A mediated agreement that addresses the support arrears, but also establishes clear communication channels and perhaps modified visitation that takes into account Ms. Jackson's caregiving responsibilities for Maya. The goal would be to strengthen family connections rather than further fracturing them." Hartford turned to Chen. "Would the state have any objection to such an approach, assuming the financial obligations are addressed in good faith?" Chen shook her head. "The state's primary concern is the welfare of the children. If that can be achieved through mediation rather than punitive measures, we would support that approach." As Hartford outlined his proposed path forward, he noticed something remarkable happening between Tamara and Darius. The rigid distance they had maintained was softening, their shared concern for their sons, and the undeniable reality of Maya's needs creating a bridge where before there had been only walls. For the first time since they had entered his chambers, Judge Hartford felt a sense of hope, not just for the resolution of this case, but for the healing of a family that had been broken, but perhaps was not beyond repair. The following week, Judge Hartford found himself doing something unprecedented in his judicial career. He was personally overseeing the first mediation session between Tamara and Darius. Typically, he would have assigned such a task to a court mediator, maintaining what he had always considered appropriate judicial distance. But something about this case, about these people, had gotten under his skin, challenging his long-held beliefs about detachment and objectivity. They gathered in a small conference room rather than his chambers or the formal courtroom. Hartford had deliberately chosen the space for its neutral, less intimidating atmosphere. Tamara arrived first, looking marginally less exhausted than she had the previous week. Maya was with her, still in the same bag carrier, though today Tamara had also brought a portable infant seat that allowed her to place the baby beside her during the discussion. "The home health nurse showed me how to adjust her oxygen levels for longer outings," Tamara explained when Hartford inquired about Maya's progress. "She's gaining weight right on schedule now." Darius arrived exactly on time, dressed more casually than he had been in court. He nodded to Hartford respectfully before his eyes went to Maya, studying the tiny infant with undisguised curiosity. Tamara noticed his interest, and after a moment's hesitation asked, "Would you like to see her properly?" The question seemed to surprise Darius. Yes, if that's okay." Hartford watched as Tamara carefully lifted Maya from the carrier, mindful of the oxygen tube, and turned her so Darius could see her face. The baby was awake, her dark eyes alert in her tiny face. "She looks like you," Darius said softly. Something about the eyes. A ghost of a smile touched Tamara's lips. "That's what my mother said too." The moment of connection was brief but significant. Hartford noted it, along with the way both parents straightened as he opened the folder before him, transitioning back into their more formal roles. "I appreciate both of you agreeing to this mediation," Hartford began. "I believe it offers our best chance at finding a solution that truly serves the interests of all the children involved." He had invited a family court mediator, Patricia Diaz, to assist, and she now took the lead, outlining the process and setting ground rules for the discussion. Hartford observed, speaking only occasionally to provide legal clarification or redirect when tensions arose. The first point of contention emerged quickly: Darius's mother. "She's been telling the boys that you don't want to see them," Darius admitted after Tamara raised concerns about messages being filtered through his family. "I should have put a stop to it, but she helps you with childcare, and you didn't want to create conflict," Tamara finished for him. There was understanding in her voice, but also hurt. "Your mother never thought I was good enough for you, Darius. She made that clear from day one." Darius didn't deny it. "She has strong opinions." "Strong enough to drive a wedge between my sons and me?" Tamara's voice remained level, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Maya's blanket. Hartford watched Darius struggle with this question, seeing a man caught between loyalty to his mother and recognition of an injustice being done to his children and their mother. "The boys need you in their lives," Darius said finally. "I know that. I'll speak to my mother." The mediator guided them toward practical solutions: scheduled video calls that wouldn't be interrupted or monitored, a shared digital calendar for school events and activities, and plans for modified in-person visits that would accommodate Maya's needs. "What about the support payments?" Darius asked eventually, circling back to the original issue that had brought them to court. Tamara presented her proposed payment plan again, explaining how her new salary at the urgent care center would allow her to make regular ongoing payments while gradually addressing the arrears. "It's less than the court ordered," she acknowledged, "but it's what I can manage while also caring for Maya and paying her medical expenses." Hartford noted that Darius's reaction was more measured than it had been in court. He studied the numbers, asking questions about Tamara's budget and expenses that were detailed but not accusatory. "The boys don't lack for anything," Darius admitted finally. "I can cover their needs. But it's the principle. They deserve support from both parents." "I agree completely," Tamara said, surprising both men with her vehemence. "I never wanted to miss those payments, Darius. Never. It killed me every month that I couldn't send what I was supposed to. The boys deserve better than that." Her sincerity was palpable, and Hartford saw it register with Darius, whose expression softened. "What if," Hartford suggested, "we modify the support order temporarily to reflect Ms. Jackson's current income, with the understanding that it will be reviewed in 6 months. The arrears could be addressed through a separate payment plan without penalties or interest, focusing on good faith efforts rather than punitive measures." This approach seemed to satisfy both parents, and they moved on to discussing visitation arrangements. It was here that Hartford witnessed the most profound shift in their interaction. "I'd like to see the boys this weekend," Tamara said cautiously. "If that's possible." Darius hesitated. "Jason has a science project due Monday, and Elijah has been having trouble with math. He might need help with homework." Hartford prepared himself for conflict, but Tamara surprised him again. "I could help with both," she offered. "I used to be the one who helped with Jason's projects, remember? And I've been helping Elijah with math over video chat." "You'd be okay handling all that with the baby too?" Darius asked, skepticism evident in his voice. "I'm a nurse, Darius. Multitasking is what I do." There was a flash of the competent professional in her eyes, a reminder that this woman was more than just her current struggles. Darius considered this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, Saturday then. But at my place so they have all their materials. And—" He paused, seeming to make a decision. "I could be there too." To help with Maya if you need to focus on the boy's work." The offer hung in the air, unexpected and significant. Tamara's eyes widened slightly before she nodded. "That would be helpful. Thank you." As the mediation continued, Hartford found himself increasingly impressed by both parents' capacity for growth. They weren't perfect. Darius still slipped occasionally into defensive posturing, and Tamara sometimes responded with wounded withdrawal. But they were trying, genuinely putting their children's needs above their own hurt feelings. When the session concluded, they had a preliminary agreement that addressed financial obligations, communication protocols, and visitation arrangements. More importantly, they had taken the first steps toward a more cooperative co-parenting relationship. As they prepared to leave, Maya began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching with discomfort. Tamara immediately checked the oxygen monitor, concern flashing across her face. "Her levels are dropping a bit," she murmured, adjusting the flow. "She might need suctioning." Hartford watched as she efficiently removed a small medical kit from her seemingly bottomless bag, explaining, "Sometimes mucus blocks the nasal passage. It's routine, but it needs to be done carefully." What happened next surprised everyone in the room. As Tamara prepared the suction bulb, Darius stepped closer. "Can I help?" he asked quietly. "Just tell me what to do." After a moment's hesitation, Tamara nodded. "Hold her head steady like this." She demonstrated, and Darius carefully positioned his hands, his large fingers dwarfing Maya's tiny head. With gentle precision, Tamara performed the suctioning procedure while Darius held the baby, their movements synchronized as if they'd done this many times before. When it was complete, Maya's oxygen levels stabilized, and she settled back into quiet alertness. Darius didn't immediately withdraw his hands, looking down at the infant with an expression Hartford couldn't quite decipher. "She's a fighter," Darius said finally, "like her mother." The comment seemed to catch Tamara off guard. She looked up at her ex-husband, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face before she simply said, "Thank you." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Hartford found himself reflecting on what he had witnessed. This wasn't just about resolving a legal dispute over child support. It was about rebuilding connections, finding common ground in the shared love for children, and perhaps, though he was careful not to romanticize it, healing old wounds enough to forge a new kind of relationship focused on co-parenting. Hartford had begun this case seeing a deadbeat mother and a righteous father. Now he saw two imperfect people doing their best in difficult circumstances, both capable of growth, compassion, and change. He wondered, not for the first time since meeting Tamara and her tiny daughter, how many other cases he had misjudged over the years, how many complex human stories he had reduced to simple narratives of right and wrong, deserving and undeserving. The thought was deeply unsettling to a man who had built his identity on certainty and clear judgment. But as he watched Tamara and Darius leave the conference room, not together but no longer as adversaries, Hartford found himself willing to sit with that discomfort, to let it challenge him, and perhaps in time, to let it change him. Saturday arrived with the crisp clarity of mid-autumn, the morning sun casting long shadows across Darius Williams's front lawn as Tamara parked her modest sedan at the curb. She sat for a moment, gathering herself, glancing in the rearview mirror at Maya secured in her car seat, the portable oxygen tank nestled beside her. This would be the first time she'd seen her sons in person in nearly 3 months, and despite the mediation session's progress, anxiety fluttered in her stomach. The front door opened before she could reach it, and 2 boys burst out onto the porch. Jason, the older at 10, had grown at least an inch since she'd last seen him. 8-year-old Elijah was missing his front tooth, a gap that hadn't been there during their video calls. "Mom!" they shouted in unison, rushing toward her before stopping abruptly, their eyes fixed on the baby carrier in her hand. "Is that her?" Jason asked, his voice hushed with curiosity. "Is that our sister?" The simple question, "our sister," caught Tamara off guard, emotion welling in her throat. "Yes," she managed, setting the carrier down on the porch swing. "This is Maya." The boys crowded around, peering at the tiny infant who blinked up at them with wide, dark eyes. "She's so small," Elijah whispered, reaching out one finger before pulling back, uncertain. "It's okay," Tamara assured him. "You can touch her hand. Just be very gentle." With exquisite care, Elijah extended his finger again, and Maya grasped it reflexively, her tiny fingers barely spanning his fingertip. His face transformed with wonder. "She's holding my finger, Mom. Look." "She's strong," Tamara said, smiling through tears she couldn't quite contain. "Just like her big brothers." Jason, ever the protector, noticed the oxygen tube. "What's that for? Is she sick?" "She was born too early," Tamara explained, keeping her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Her lungs need a little extra help until they grow stronger, but she's getting better every day." Darius appeared in the doorway, watching the reunion with an expression Tamara couldn't quite read. "Boys, let your mother bring Maya inside. It's too cold out here for a baby." They moved into the house that had once been Tamara's home too, though the decor had changed. New furniture, different wall colors, but the layout was hauntingly familiar. Photographs lined the entryway, chronicling the boys' growth. Soccer games, school portraits, holiday celebrations. Tamara noted with a pang that she was absent from these visual records of her sons' lives, erased from their documented history, if not from their hearts. "I set up the dining room table for Jason's science project," Darius said, his voice carefully neutral. "And Elijah's math workbooks are in the living room." Tamara nodded, grateful for the practical focus. "Perfect. Let me just get Maya settled, and then we can get started." As she set up the portable infant seat and arranged Maya's oxygen, Tamara was acutely aware of Darius observing her every move. There was curiosity in his gaze, and something else, an evaluation of sorts, as if he were assessing her competence with this new child. The morning unfolded in a rhythm that felt both strange and familiar. Tamara helped Jason construct his solar system model, her nurse's hands steady as they painted tiny planets and strung them in precise orbital distances. Between questions about Neptune's color and Saturn's rings, Jason peppered her with updates about his basketball team and his new best friend at school. Elijah struggled with fractions, his frustration mounting until Tamara pulled out a set of measuring cups from the kitchen. "Math isn't just numbers on paper," she told him, letting him pour water from the 1-cup measure into the quarter cups. "It's all around us, in everything we do." Throughout it all, Maya dozed and woke, needed feeding and changing, required oxygen adjustments and medication. Tamara moved between all 3 children with practiced efficiency, never leaving one task fully unattended even as she shifted focus. Darius remained present at the periphery, stepping in occasionally to help with Maya when Tamara needed both hands for the science project, or fetching snacks for the boys when they grew hungry. It wasn't seamless co-parenting. There were awkward pauses, moments of uncertainty about boundaries, but it was a beginning. During a quiet moment when the boys were engrossed in a video game break, Darius approached Tamara as she gently rocked Maya's seat with her foot while reviewing Elijah's completed math worksheets. "You make it look easy," he said quietly, handling all 3 of them at once. Tamara looked up, surprised by the comment. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but it's necessary. They all need me, in different ways." Darius nodded, seeming to absorb this. "The boys have missed you, more than they let on in the video calls." "I've missed them too," Every single day. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for today, for letting me be here, in person. It means everything." Something shifted in Darius's expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a slight relaxation of his perpetually squared shoulders. "They're your sons too," he said finally. "They always have been." The simple acknowledgement brought tears to Tamara's eyes that she quickly blinked away. This wasn't the time for emotional reconciliations or rehashing old wounds. This was about the children, about building something workable from the fragments of what had once been a family. Across town, Judge Maxwell Hartford sat in his home office, surrounded by case files he'd brought home for weekend review. His reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he studied documents that, a week ago, would have been straightforward applications of legal principles. Today, each file seemed to pulse with untold complexities, with human stories that couldn't be reduced to simple categories of compliance and non-compliance. The Jackson Williams case had cracked something open in him, forcing him to confront the limitations of his approach to justice. For 27 years, he had prided himself on being dispassionate, on making decisions based on facts and precedent rather than emotion or circumstance. He had believed this made him fair, impartial. Now he wondered if it had simply made him blind. The case before him involved a father who had fallen behind on child support after being injured on the job. Hartford's typical approach would have been clear. Obligations didn't disappear because of personal misfortune. But now he found himself wondering about the full context. Did the man have access to adequate health care? Had he attempted to file for temporary modification? Were there systemic barriers, like the ones Tamara had encountered, that had prevented him from navigating the system properly? Hartford removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose where they had left red marks. The law was supposed to be a framework for justice, not a weapon to wield against those already struggling. How had he lost sight of that fundamental truth? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Patricia Diaz, the mediator from the Jackson Williams session. "Judge Hartford, I apologize for disturbing your weekend, but I thought you'd want to know. I just received a call from Darius Williams." Hartford felt a flicker of concern. "Is there a problem with the visitation today?" "Quite the opposite," Diaz replied, and Hartford could hear the smile in her voice. "Mr. Williams called to ask if we could modify the agreement to include regular Saturday visits. He said the boys are thriving with their mother there and he—" She paused, as if still surprised by the information. "He mentioned that he's learning a lot about caring for the baby. Apparently he's been helping with Maya's oxygen and feeding." Hartford felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "That's unexpected but welcome news." He also asked about resources for families of premature infants. "I think he's starting to see himself as connected to Maya's well-being, even though she's not his biological child." After ending the call, Hartford sat back in his chair, thinking about the ripple effects of compassion, how one moment of seeing beyond rigid categories could transform not just a legal case, but human lives. Tamara and Darius were finding their way toward a new kind of family arrangement, one that didn't fit neatly into the custodial, non-custodial binary that the legal system preferred, but that served the needs of all their children. Could the court system similarly evolve? Could it become more responsive to the complex realities of human lives, more accessible to those without resources, more focused on healing than punishment? Hartford picked up another case file, reading it with new eyes. The revolution might begin small, one judge, one courtroom, one case at a time, but it had to begin somewhere. And perhaps, he thought, it had already begun, in the moment when a desperate mother had shown him what was hidden in her bag, and in doing so, revealed what had been hidden in his own heart: the capacity for growth, for change, for seeing beyond the surface to the full humanity of those who stood before him. 3 weeks had passed since that first explosive court appearance, and Judge Hartford sat in his chambers reviewing the Jackson-Williams file one last time before the scheduled hearing. The document before him now told a different story than it had 3 weeks ago. Added to the original enforcement petition were the mediation agreement, progress reports from Patricia Diaz, and photographs of Maya's medical improvements, submitted by Tamara as evidence of her stabilizing situation. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. James Kellerman, a fellow judge and longtime colleague, leaned against the doorframe with the casual ease of their 20-year friendship. "Heard an interesting rumor, Max," Kellerman said, his tone light but his eyes shrewd. "They're saying you've gone soft on child support enforcement, that you're personally mediating cases now." Hartford carefully closed the file. "Not cases, James. One case, with exceptional circumstances." Kellerman raised an eyebrow. "That's how it starts. Make an exception once and suddenly everyone thinks they're exceptional." He stepped into the office, lowering his voice. "Look, we all get these hard luck stories. Part of the job is not letting them get to you. You taught me that, remember?" Hartford remembered. He'd mentored Kellerman when he first took the bench, instilling in him the same principles of detachment and strict adherence to precedent that had guided his own career. Now those words returned to him with a hollow ring. "Perhaps what I taught wasn't entirely correct," Hartford said carefully. Kellerman's eyebrows shot up. "Careful, Max. Talk like that could undermine everything we've built here. Consistency, predictability, deterrence." "And what about justice?" Hartford asked quietly. "What about seeing the human beings behind the case numbers?" "That's what defense attorneys are for," Kellerman scoffed. "Our job is to apply the law, not hand out tissues and sympathy cards." Hartford studied his colleague, wondering if he had ever sounded as callous, as disconnected from the real-world impact of his decisions. The uncomfortable answer was almost certainly yes. "The Jackson case has a hearing in 15 minutes, Hartford said, effectively ending the conversation. "I should prepare." Kellerman lingered in the doorway. "The courthouse is talking, Max. People are wondering what's gotten into you. Judge the Hammer Hartford personally mediating, granting continuances, considering circumstances rather than just the letter of the law." He shook his head. "Whatever's going on, just remember, you set the tone in your courtroom. Start accommodating excuses, and soon that's all you'll hear." After Kellerman left, Hartford sat motionless, his colleague's warning echoing in his mind. There was truth in it. Courts functioned on precedent and consistency. But what if the consistent application of rigid standards wasn't always just? What if context mattered more than he had previously allowed? When Hartford entered courtroom 3B at exactly 10 a.m., he was struck by how different the atmosphere felt from 3 weeks ago. Tamara Jackson sat at the defendant's table, still with her large bag, but her posture was more assured. Maya was with her, still in the carrier, but now wearing a tiny pink hat, her oxygen tube nearly hidden beneath it. The improvement in the infant's appearance was noticeable. Her face fuller, her color healthier. Darius Williams sat not at the opposite table, but directly behind Tamara, close enough to lean forward and speak quietly to her. The adversarial seating arrangement of their first appearance had given way to something that, while not united, was certainly less divided. Melissa Chen, the state's attorney, approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state has reviewed the mediation agreement and Ms. Jackson's payment plan. Given Mr. Williams's support of the modified arrangement and Ms. Jackson's good faith payments over the past 3 weeks, we're prepared to endorse the agreement as presented." Hartford nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. Mr. Williams, would you like to address the court regarding your position?" Darius stood, straightening his tie. Yes, Your Honor. I fully support the modified agreement. Ms. Jackson has demonstrated her commitment to our sons both financially and through consistent visitation. The boys have benefited greatly from her increased presence in their lives these past few weeks. There was a new tone in Darius's voice, a respect that hadn't been there before, an acknowledgement of Tamara as a co-parent rather than an opponent. And Ms. Jackson, Hartford continued, do you remain committed to the payment plan and visitation schedule outlined in the agreement? Absolutely, Your Honor, Tamara replied. I've already made the first 3 payments according to the new schedule, and I've been able to visit the boys twice weekly while maintaining Maya's medical appointments. I see that Maya is with you again today, Hartford noted. How is her health progressing? A smile transformed Tamara's face. She's doing wonderfully, Your Honor. She's gained almost 2 pounds, and her oxygen needs have decreased significantly. The doctors are very optimistic about her development. Hartford noticed Darius nodding along with Tamara's report, his expression holding genuine investment in Maya's progress. Something had shifted between them. A shared concern for this child who was connected to only one of them by blood, but who had somehow become a bridge between their separate lives. Given the state's endorsement and the apparent agreement of both parents, I see no reason not to approve this modified arrangement, Hartford announced. The support order will be temporarily adjusted to reflect Ms. Jackson's current income, with a review scheduled in 6 months. The arrears payment plan is approved without penalties or interest, conditional upon consistent payments as outlined. The visitation schedule will follow the mediated agreement. He paused, looking between Tamara and Darius. I commend both of you for your willingness to move beyond adversarial positions toward a solution that genuinely serves the best interests of your children, all of your children. As the hearing concluded, Hartford noticed a figure at the back of the courtroom, an elderly black woman whose rigid posture and narrowed eyes suggested disapproval. From the way Darius's shoulders tensed when he spotted her, Hartford surmised this must be his mother, the woman who had pushed for aggressive enforcement against Tamara. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Hartford paused near the water fountain, overhearing a conversation around the corner that confirmed his suspicion. I don't understand why you're letting her off the hook, the older woman was saying, her voice taut with displeasure. After everything she put you through walking out on your family, and now you're just forgiving her? Mom, that's not what happened, and you know it. Darius's voice was firm but respectful. The divorce was mutual, and Tamara never walked out on the boys. We agreed I would have primary custody because my schedule was more flexible at the time. She still owes you money. She's paying what she can while taking care of a premature baby with serious medical needs. The boys adore their little sister, by the way. Your grandchildren. There was a loaded silence before the older woman spoke again. So now you're playing daddy to her new baby? The one she had with another man after leaving you? I'm not playing anything. I'm supporting the mother of my children as she cares for all her children. Maya needs special care, and my sons need their mother. It's that simple. Nothing about that woman has ever been simple, Darius. Maybe that's because people are complex, Mom. Life is complex. And sometimes what looks like irresponsibility from the outside is actually incredible strength and determination when you bother to look closer. Hartford moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but feeling a surge of respect for Darius. The man was standing up not just for Tamara, but for a more nuanced understanding of their shared history and present circumstances. He was growing beyond the binary thinking that had characterized their post-divorce relationship, just as Hartford himself was being challenged to grow beyond his own rigid categories. Back in his chambers, Hartford found a note from his clerk about another case, a father seeking temporary modification of support due to medical leave for cancer treatment. 6 weeks ago, Hartford would have approached such a case with skepticism, focusing on the obligation rather than the circumstance. Today, he found himself writing a note. Schedule for detailed hearing. Request medical documentation and proposed payment plan during treatment period. Kellerman's warning still echoed in his mind. The courthouse was indeed talking. His reputation as the Hammer was being questioned. Some would see his evolving approach as weakness, as capitulation to excuses rather than enforcement of responsibility. But watching Tamara and Darius forge a new path forward, one that acknowledged hardship without abandoning obligation, that prioritized children's well-being over punitive adherence to payment schedules, Hartford was beginning to understand that true justice required both compassion and accountability, both structure and flexibility. Perhaps his reputation needed to change, perhaps the courthouse needed to talk, and perhaps, just perhaps, the legal system itself needed to evolve toward a more humane application of the law. One case, one judge, one moment of recognition at a time. 4 months later, Judge Hartford stood at the back of courtroom 3B, observing a family court mediation conducted by Patricia Diaz. The parties weren't Tamara and Darius this time, but another set of parents trying to navigate the complicated terrain of co-parenting amid financial hardship. Hartford wasn't officially presiding. He was there to observe what had become known around the courthouse as the Hartford Protocol, a mediation-first approach to child support enforcement cases that had grown out of his handling of the Jackson Williams case. In the months since that pivotal hearing, Hartford had quietly revolutionized his courtroom procedures. Enforcement cases now began with mandatory mediation sessions. Financial hardship claims were evaluated with a more holistic approach. Self-represented litigants received additional resources to help them navigate the system's complexities. Not everyone approved. Judge Kellerman and several other colleagues had voiced concerns about coddling deadbeats and undermining deterrence, but the results were becoming difficult to ignore. Payment compliance rates had increased by nearly 20%. Courtroom confrontations had decreased dramatically. And perhaps most significantly, children were reporting more consistent contact with both parents, according to the court-appointed guardians ad litem. After the session concluded, Hartford returned to his chambers to find a small gift bag on his desk. Inside was a tiny knitted judge's robe, barely large enough for a doll, and a note in Tamara's handwriting. For the smallest member of your fan club. Maya's first mediation observation day is next week. She wanted to dress appropriately. Hartford smiled, placing the miniature robe carefully on his bookshelf. The gesture touched him deeply, though he was careful to maintain appropriate judicial boundaries. He had recused himself from any further official proceedings in the Jackson Williams case, precisely to avoid any appearance of impropriety. But he remained interested in their progress, and through Patricia Diaz, he occasionally received updates. Maya was thriving now. Her oxygen support needed only at night. Tamara had been promoted at Westside Urgent Care, her nursing expertise finally receiving the recognition it deserved. The boys were spending alternating weekends with her, their relationship stronger than ever. And most surprisingly, Darius had become an unexpected advocate for Maya, even accompanying her to medical appointments when Tamara's work schedule conflicted. The man who had once insisted on rigid enforcement of financial obligations regardless of circumstances had developed a nuanced understanding of how life's complexities could disrupt even the most well-intentioned plans. Hartford's desk phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his clerk. "Judge, there's someone here to see you, a Mr. Williams. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent." Hartford felt a flicker of concern. "Darius Williams? Send him in." Moments later, Darius entered the chamber, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. He held a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Williams, this is unexpected," Hartford said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit down. Is everything all right with your family?" Darius took the seat, placing the envelope on the desk between them. "My family is well, thank you. That's not why I'm here." He took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about what happened in your courtroom 4 months ago, about how easily things could have gone differently. Hartford nodded, waiting for him to continue. If you'd been the judge I expected, the judge your reputation suggested, Tamara might have faced serious penalties. She might have lost her nursing license due to a failure to pay judgment. Maya might not have received the care she needed. Darius's voice grew quieter. My sons might have effectively lost their mother. The law provides for consideration of circumstances, Mr. Williams, Hartford said carefully. I simply applied that provision. But not all judges do, Darius countered. And not all parties have the resources to effectively present their circumstances. He pushed the envelope across the desk. That's why I'm here. Hartford opened the envelope to find a detailed proposal for a family court navigation program, a comprehensive support system for parents facing enforcement proceedings, especially those without legal representation. The proposal included volunteer attorneys, financial counseling, mediation services, and, most surprisingly, a parent mentorship component that would pair those new to the system with those who had successfully navigated it. This is quite thorough, Hartford said, genuinely impressed. Have you worked in program development before? Darius nodded. My real estate development firm has a community investment division. We've created several educational and housing programs, but this would be our first venture into legal system support. And you're proposing to fund this personally? Initially, yes. I've already secured commitments from 3 law firms for pro bono support, and I'm in discussions with the Westbrook Community Foundation about matching funds. Darius leaned forward. Judge Hartford, what happened with Tamara made me realize how easily the system can become a weapon rather than a support structure. I was ready to use that weapon because I was hurt, because I was listening to voices that encouraged punishment rather than resolution. Hartford thought of Darius's mother, of the rigid thinking she had encouraged, and of how Darius had grown beyond it. I'm grateful that you saw what I couldn't, Darius continued, that you took the time to look beyond the surface. But not everyone gets that chance. This program could help ensure they do. Hartford closed the proposal, deeply moved by the transformation before him. This wasn't just about one family healing. It was about taking that healing and extending it outward, creating ripples that could potentially change hundreds of lives. I'd like to present this to the Court Administrative Committee, Hartford said. With your permission, of course. This aligns perfectly with changes we've been considering. That's exactly what I was hoping for, Darius replied, visible relief crossing his features. There's one other thing. He hesitated. Tamara doesn't know I'm here. We've come a long way in rebuilding trust, and I didn't want to risk overstepping. But I think she would be an incredible resource for this program, especially for mothers trying to balance infant care with court obligations. Hartford considered this. Perhaps you should discuss it with her first. This feels like something you should develop together, given your shared experience. Darius nodded, a small smile touching his lips. You're right. We're still learning how to be partners in a different way, not as spouses but as co-parents. It's not always easy, but it's worth it for the kids. He stood to leave. All the kids. After Darius left, Hartford sat quietly, reflecting on the unexpected visit. The transformation he'd witnessed in this one family continued to expand in ways he couldn't have anticipated. From Tamara's desperate moment in his courtroom to Darius's proposal for systemic change, the journey represented everything he had come to believe about justice's true nature, that it must be alive, responsive, human. Later that afternoon, Hartford received an unexpected summons to the office of the Chief Judge, Eleanor Martinez. He found her reviewing Darius's proposal, which he had forwarded immediately after their meeting. This is impressive, Martinez said without preamble, and perfectly timed. The State Judiciary Conference is looking for innovative programs to highlight next month. Hartford nodded, cautiously optimistic. The Williams proposal has merit, particularly when combined with the procedural changes we've been piloting in my courtroom. Martinez studied him over her reading glasses. Max, there's been talk about your evolution these past few months. Not all of it supportive. I'm aware, Hartford replied. Judge Kellerman has been quite vocal about his concerns. James believes you're undermining judicial authority, Martinez said bluntly. He thinks you've gone from being our most consistent enforcer to our most lenient judge. Hartford considered this characterization. I haven't abandoned my belief in personal responsibility, Eleanor. I've simply expanded my understanding of how to foster it effectively. Punishment without support rarely creates lasting change. Martinez nodded slowly. The data from your courtroom supports your approach. Compliance is up, recidivism is down, and we've seen a decrease in emergency motions. She tapped the proposal. I'd like you to present this at the conference, along with your procedural innovations. We're calling it Compassionate Accountability, Reimagining Family Court Enforcement. Hartford felt a momentary hesitation. Public speaking had never been his favorite activity, but the opportunity to influence judicial practice statewide was too significant to decline. I'd be honored, though I think Mr. Williams should be included, along with Ms. Jackson if she's willing. This grew from their experience, after all. As he left Martinez's office, Hartford found himself reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought him here. 4 months ago, he had been the hammer, certain of his approach, comfortable in his rigid categories of right and wrong, deserving and undeserving. It had taken one mother's courage, bringing her fragile infant into his courtroom, laying bare her struggles and her fierce determination, to crack open his certainty and make space for growth. He thought of Maya in her tiny judge's robe, of Jason and Elijah rebuilding their relationship with their mother, of Tamara balancing work and parenting with grace and determination, of Darius expanding his definition of family to include a child not biologically his. Each of them had grown beyond the narrow roles that circumstance and hurt had assigned them. Perhaps that was the true measure of justice, not punishment or enforcement, but the creation of conditions where growth was possible, where healing could happen, where the human spirit could expand beyond the limitations of past mistakes and present challenges. Judge Maxwell Hartford, once known as the Hammer, was becoming known by a new nickname around the courthouse, the Bridge. He found he much preferred it. The State Judicial Conference Center buzzed with activity as judges, attorneys, and court administrators from across the state gathered for the annual 3-day event. Judge Hartford stood in the wings of the main presentation hall, straightening his tie and reviewing his notes one last time. In a moment of uncharacteristic vanity, he'd gotten a haircut the day before, and his usually severe gray hair was now trimmed in a softer, more approachable style that seemed to mirror his evolving judicial philosophy. "Nervous?" Chief Judge Martinez asked, appearing beside him. "Terrified," Hartford admitted with a small smile. "Public speaking has never been my forte." "Just speak from experience," Martinez advised. "That's why we're doing this as a panel rather than a traditional presentation. Your story, their story, is powerful in its own right." Hartford nodded, glancing toward the other side of the stage where Tamara and Darius were waiting. They presented a striking picture. Tamara in a deep blue dress that highlighted her quiet dignity. Darius in a charcoal suit that spoke of professional success without ostentation. Between them, in a carrier decorated with colorful ribbons, was 8-month-old Maya, now chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed. Her oxygen tube replaced by only the faintest hint of medical monitoring. A small pulse oximeter on her toe, visible only when she kicked off her tiny shoe. The moderator's voice came through the speakers, introducing the session. Compassionate Accountability, Reimagining Family Court Enforcement. Hartford took a deep breath and walked onto the stage, followed by Tamara and Darius. The large audience of legal professionals shifted in their seats, many leaning forward with interest. In the front row, Hartford spotted Judge Kellerman, arms crossed and expression skeptical. Several rows behind him sat Patricia Diaz and a group of court mediators, their faces encouraging. Family court exists in a unique space within our legal system, Hartford began once they were seated. Unlike criminal court, we're not primarily concerned with punishment. Unlike civil court, we're not simply adjudicating disputes between parties. We are tasked with the profound responsibility of safeguarding children's well-being while balancing parental rights and responsibilities. He paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. For 27 years, I approached this responsibility with what I believed was appropriate judicial detachment. I focused on rules, precedents, and consistent enforcement. I believed this made me fair, impartial, and effective. Another pause. I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the audience. Judges rarely admitted error, especially not in such public forums. 6 months ago, a case came before me that challenged everything I thought I knew about justice in family court. Rather than tell you about it, I'd like you to hear directly from the people involved. He turned to Tamara. Ms. Jackson, would you share your experience? Tamara leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes upon her. 6 months ago, I stood in Judge Hartford's courtroom as a defendant in a child support enforcement action. I was a newly unemployed nurse, a mother of 2 boys who lived primarily with their father, and, though it wasn't in any of the court documents, I had just given birth to a premature baby who required round-the-clock medical care. She described her desperate attempt to navigate the court system without legal representation, the multiple rejected filings, the fear of losing her nursing license due to the enforcement action, and finally, her decision to bring Maya to court. I had no childcare options. Maya needed constant monitoring and oxygen support. So I put her in a carrier, packed her medical equipment, and took her with me, knowing it was against court rules but seeing no alternative. Hartford watched the audience as they listened, noting the shifting expressions, skepticism giving way to understanding, judgment softening into empathy. Even Kellerman seemed less rigid, though his arms remained firmly crossed. When Judge Hartford saw Maya, Tamara continued, he could have simply enforced the rules. He could have penalized me for bringing an infant to court, ignored my circumstances, and proceeded with enforcement. Many judges would have. She glanced at Hartford with genuine appreciation. Instead, he paused. He listened. He looked beyond the surface of a deadbeat mom and saw a person doing her best in impossible circumstances. Darius took over next, describing his initial anger and insistence on aggressive enforcement, his mother's influence on his perspective, and his gradual shift toward understanding as he witnessed Tamara's dedication to all her children. I was using the court as a weapon, he admitted bluntly. I was hurt from our divorce, influenced by family members who encouraged punitive approaches, and completely blind to the reality of Tamara's situation. I didn't want to understand. I wanted to win. He described the mediation process, the Saturday visitations, and his growing connection to Maya. Today we have a co-parenting relationship that works not just for our sons, but for all 3 children. Maya may not be biologically mine, but she's part of our extended family network now. She has 2 brothers who adore her, a mother who moved mountains to care for her, and me. Well, I guess I'm the bonus dad who helps with doctor's appointments and occasionally gives her mother a much-needed break. This prompted warm laughter from the audience, the atmosphere in the hall shifting from professional interest to genuine engagement. Hartford returned to the microphone, outlining the procedural changes his courtroom had implemented, the Hartford Protocol, that prioritized mediation, provided resources for self-represented litigants, and considered the holistic circumstances of families before applying enforcement measures. "The results speak for themselves," he said, displaying a slide with clear metrics. Payment compliance up 23%, emergency motions down 35%, and perhaps most importantly, children reporting more consistent, positive contact with both parents, according to our guardian ad litem assessments. The presentation shifted to Darius's family court navigation program, now in its pilot phase with funding from both private donors and a state judicial innovation grant. The program paired volunteer attorneys with self-represented litigants, offered financial counseling for parents struggling with support obligations, and included a mentor component where parents who had successfully navigated the system helped newcomers. The most remarkable aspect, Hartford noted, is that this program arose not from a court mandate or a legislative initiative, but from the transformed understanding of a father who had once demanded the strictest enforcement without consideration of circumstances. As the formal presentation concluded and the floor opened for questions, Hartford noticed Judge Kellerman approaching the microphone. "This all sounds very compassionate," Kellerman began, his tone making the word sound almost pejorative. "But aren't we sending the wrong message? That obligations are negotiable when life gets difficult? That parents can simply plead hardship to avoid responsibility?" Before Hartford could respond, Tamara leaned forward. "If I may," she said, her professional nurse's voice carrying clearly, "the modified agreement didn't eliminate my obligations. It restructured them to make fulfillment possible. I've now paid back 70% of the arrears while maintaining current payments. Under the original enforcement action, I likely would have lost my nursing license, making it impossible to pay anything at all." She gestured toward Maya, who was contentedly playing with a small toy giraffe. "And more importantly, all 3 children would have suffered. My sons from losing meaningful contact with their mother, and my daughter from losing critical care during her most vulnerable time." Darius added, "The goal should be healthy, supported children and functioning parents who can provide for them. Punishment that undermines that goal serves no one." Kellerman appeared taken aback by the directness of their responses. After a momentary hesitation, he simply nodded and returned to his seat. The rest of the Q&A session brought thoughtful questions about implementation, resource allocation, and how to balance compassion with accountability. Throughout it all, Hartford noticed how seamlessly Tamara and Darius worked together, anticipating each other's points, building on shared experiences, presenting a united front despite their history. As the session concluded to enthusiastic applause, Chief Judge Martinez joined them on stage. "What you've witnessed today is not just a new approach to family court enforcement," she told the audience. "It's a reminder that our legal system is not static. It evolves through the courage of those willing to look beyond rigid precedent to the human realities before them." Hartford felt a swell of emotion as he looked out at his colleagues. Some, like Kellerman, might never fully embrace his evolved approach. But others were nodding, taking notes, asking follow-up questions as people began to mingle. "You've started something important," Martinez said quietly as they left the stage. "These ripples will spread far beyond your courtroom." In the reception area afterward, judges and attorneys clustered around Tamara and Darius, asking questions, sharing similar cases, seeking advice on implementation in their own jurisdictions. Maya had become the unofficial mascot of the conference, passed carefully from Tamara to Darius as they each spoke with different groups. Hartford stood slightly apart, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. Patricia Diaz joined him, offering a cup of coffee. "Quite a journey from the hammer to conference keynote speaker on compassionate justice," she remarked with a smile. Hartford chuckled. "If you had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here, having just publicly admitted I was wrong about my entire approach to judicial practice, I'd have questioned your sanity. And yet here you are, growing, evolving, changing lives. Diaz gestured toward Tamara, who was deep in conversation with a judge from the Northern District. Including your own. Hartford nodded, watching as Darius approached Tamara, Maya reaching out from his arms toward her mother with a delighted giggle. The easy way they transferred the baby, their shared smile at her antics, the unconscious choreography of parents who had found their rhythm. It all spoke of healing that went beyond legal resolutions. The law doesn't change, Hartford said reflectively. But perhaps how we apply it, with what degree of humanity, with what awareness of context, that can and should evolve. As he watched the living result of that evolution, a family reconfigured but whole, children thriving despite obstacles, parents growing beyond their past hurts, Judge Maxwell Hartford felt something he had rarely experienced in his long judicial career: the profound satisfaction of justice, not merely imposed, but actually achieved. 2 years later, Judge Maxwell Hartford sat on a bench in Westbrook Community Park, watching a birthday celebration unfold beneath the sprawling oak trees. The early autumn air carried just a hint of crispness, leaves beginning their transition from green to gold, matching the festive decorations that adorned the picnic area. A banner stretched between 2 trees proclaimed, "Happy Second Birthday, Maya," in cheerful purple letters. Beneath it, the birthday girl herself twirled in circles, her pink tutu flaring around her chubby legs, her laughter ringing out as she tried to catch bubbles blown by her brothers. 12-year-old Jason and 10-year-old Elijah took their bubble-blowing responsibilities seriously, creating a magical cloud around their little sister, their faces alight with the pure joy of making her happy. No oxygen tube, no monitors, no medical equipment of any kind. Just a healthy, active toddler celebrating her birthday. The medical crises of her early months, visible only in the protective watchfulness that still occasionally crossed her mother's face. Hartford smiled as Tamara approached, carrying a tray of juice boxes. "Judge Hartford, I'm so glad you could make it. Maya will be thrilled when she realizes you're here, though at the moment, bubbles are the center of her universe." "I wouldn't have missed it," Hartford replied, accepting a juice box with dignified amusement. "And please, I've told you before, it's Max. I'm retiring in 3 weeks. Soon, Judge Hartford will be a thing of the past." "Never," Tamara said with a warm smile. "You'll always be Judge Hartford to me, the man who looked beyond the surface and changed everything." From across the park, Darius waved, manning the grill with practiced ease, an apron protecting his casual clothes. He was deep in conversation with a young couple Hartford recognized from the family court navigation program, new participants being mentored by Darius and Tamara as they worked through their own co-parenting challenges. The program had expanded dramatically over the past 2 years, now operating in 3 counties with plans for statewide implementation. Its success had drawn attention from neighboring states, with judicial delegations visiting regularly to study the model. The core of it remained exactly what Darius had first proposed: support rather than punishment, mediation rather than confrontation, and peer mentorship from those who had walked the same difficult path. Hartford had watched with pride as Tamara and Darius had become the program's most effective advocates, sharing their story with a vulnerability and honesty that resonated deeply with struggling parents. Their once adversarial relationship had transformed into a partnership focused on their shared children and on helping others navigate the treacherous waters of family court. "How are your sons doing with the new arrangement?" Hartford asked, referring to the recent modification that had increased Tamara's physical custody to nearly equal time. Tamara's face brightened. "They're thriving. Jason's making honor roll consistently now, and Elijah's anxiety issues have almost disappeared. The stability of having both homes as truly home seems to have made all the difference." Hartford nodded, remembering the mediation session where this change had been formalized. Darius had been the one to propose it, recognizing that the boys needed their mother as a daily presence, not just a weekend parent. It had meant adjustments for everyone, new routines, logistical challenges, the inevitable complications of maintaining two households, but the benefits for the children had made it worthwhile. And Darius's mother? Hartford couldn't help asking. Tamara laughed softly. Mrs. Williams is evolving, slowly. Maya's the first grandchild she didn't instantly adore, but it's hard to resist that little personality. Last week she actually volunteered to watch her while I covered an emergency shift at the clinic. The clinic was Tamara's newest professional chapter, a community health center where she worked as a nurse practitioner, having completed her advanced degree with Darius's support in childcare and encouragement. She specialized in maternal infant health, bringing her personal experience to bear in helping other mothers of medically fragile infants. Judge Hartford, Maya's voice rang out as she finally noticed him, abandoning the bubbles to race toward him with the determined waddle of a toddler on a mission. She crashed into his knees, looking up with a face-splitting grin. You came to my birthday. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Miss Maya, he replied, his judicial solemnity melting into grandfatherly warmth. He reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small gift box. I believe this is for the birthday girl. Maya clambered onto the bench beside him, accepting the package with the serious concentration only toddlers can bring to the task of unwrapping presents. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny gavel. Because you were my first courtroom client, Hartford explained, as Tamara helped fasten it around Maya's wrist. And the most important one. Maya examined the charm with interest. Like your hammer, she said, making the adults laugh. Exactly like my hammer, Hartford agreed. A reminder that sometimes the most important part of a judge's job is knowing when not to use it. As Maya ran off to show her brothers her new treasure, Darius joined them, wiping his hands on his apron. Judge Hartford, glad you could make it. He gestured toward the young couple he'd been mentoring. That's Michael and Keisha. They're doing the program after their support hearing last month, making real progress already. Hartford nodded, recognizing the names. The case had been before Judge Kellerman, who, surprisingly, had referred them to the navigation program rather than proceeding immediately to enforcement. Small victories. Your legacy will outlast your time on the bench, Darius said, seeming to read Hartford's thoughts. The Hartford Protocol is in the judicial training materials now. Every new family court judge learns about compassionate accountability. It's your legacy, too, Hartford reminded him. All of yours. He glanced around the park, taking in the scene, not just Tamara's family, but the half-dozen other families from the program who had been invited to the birthday celebration. Former adversaries now supporting each other, children playing together across blended family lines, parents who had once used the court as a battleground, now finding common ground in their shared love for their children. The birthday party continued around them, Maya blowing out candles with enthusiastic help from her brothers, presents being unwrapped with delight, children racing between picnic tables in some elaborate game of their own invention. Hartford observed it all with the careful attention he had once reserved for legal precedents, seeing in these ordinary moments of joy the true measure of what they had accomplished. As the afternoon waned, Hartford prepared to leave, thanking Tamara and Darius for including him in their celebration. Before you go, Tamara said, we have something for you. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a formal invitation to the grand opening of the Westbrook Family Support Center, a permanent home for the navigation program and related services, funded through a combination of state grants, Darius's foundation, and community support. We'd be honored if you'd cut the ribbon, Darius added. It seems fitting, since none of this would exist without you. Hartford felt unexpected emotion tightening his throat. The honor would be mine. As he walked to his car, Hartford found himself reflecting on the arc of his judicial career, from the rigid certainty of his early years to the more nuanced understanding of his final chapter. He had begun as the hammer, seeing his role as enforcing rules without exception. He would end as the bridge, recognized for connecting legal principles with human realities. The transformation had begun in a single moment, when a desperate mother had shown him what was hidden in her bag, and in doing so, had revealed what was hidden in his own heart. The capacity for growth, for compassion, for seeing beyond rigid categories to the full humanity of those who stood before him. From his car, Hartford took one last look at the birthday celebration. Maya was perched on Darius's shoulders, reaching for leaves on a low-hanging branch, while Tamara stood nearby with her arms around her sons, all of them laughing at the toddler's antics. They weren't a conventional family by any definition, but they were unquestionably a family, bound not by legal structures or biological connections, but by something both simpler and more profound: love that had found its way through obstacles, care that transcended categories, commitment that had weathered storms. In that tableau, Judge Maxwell Hartford saw the truest expression of justice he had encountered in his long career. Not punishment or enforcement, but healing. Not rigid adherence to rules, but thoughtful application of principles. Not the letter of the law, but its deepest spirit. As he drove away, the autumn sun warm on his face, Hartford carried with him the certainty that while his time on the bench was ending, the ripples from that pivotal moment in courtroom 3B would continue to spread, touching lives he would never know, creating possibilities for healing he could only imagine. Justice, he had finally learned, was not a hammer, but a bridge, connecting past to future, rule to reality, heart to heart.